Imagine a kid growing up so poor that he had to kick around a sock stuffed with rags because his family couldn't afford a real soccer ball. Now, imagine that same kid rising to become the most famous athlete on the planet, a man so adored that entire stadiums shook with chants of his name, and even world leaders lined up just to shake his hand. That kid was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world knows him simply as Pelé. His story is not just about soccer. It's about how one human being can rise from nothing and become a legend whose name will live forever. Today, we're diving into the top 10 facts about Pelé. And trust me, some of these will leave you speechless. Let's start with one of the most mind-blowing truths about his career. Or 10. Pelé won 3 World Cups, something no one else has ever done. When people talk about greatness in sports, they often measure it in championship rings or titles. Michael Jordan has 6 NBA championships. Tom Brady has 7 Super Bowls. Serena Williams has 23 Grand Slam singles titles. But in the world's most popular sport, soccer, the ultimate prize is the FIFA World Cup. And here's the fact that separates Pelé from every other player in history. He's the only man to ever win it 3 times. Pelé lifted the World Cup trophy in 1958, 1962, and 1970. To put that into perspective, the tournament only happens once every 4 years. That means his dominance stretched across more than a decade of global competition. Imagine if an NFL quarterback won Super Bowls in 3 different decades. That is the level of consistency we are talking about here. The first one came in 1958 when Pelé was just 17 years old. Think about that. Most teenagers are worried about high school exams or getting their driver AS license. Pelé was scoring goals on the biggest stage in sports. In fact, he scored a hat trick in the semifinal against France and then 2 more in the final against Sweden, helping Brazil win their very first World Cup. Overnight, a skinny teenager who once shined shoes to make extra money became a national hero. Then came 1962 in Chile. By this point, Pelé was already considered the best in the world, but he suffered an injury early in the tournament. Lesser players would have faded into the background, but Brazil's depth and Pelé's influence even off the pitch carried the team to another victory. While he wasn't the top scorer, just having Pelé on the roster gave Brazil the confidence that destiny was on their side. 8 years later, in 1970, Pelé returned for his 3rd and most spectacular World Cup in Mexico. He was older, more mature, and carrying the pressure of an entire nation. But he didn't just play, he dominated. Pelé scored 4 goals in the tournament, including the opener in the final against Italy. More importantly, he was the orchestrator of what many still call the greatest team in soccer history. Brazil's 1970 squad dazzled the world with their attacking style, and Pelé was at the heart of it. When the final whistle blew, Pelé stood with his arms raised, surrounded by teammates, cementing his place as the only man with 3 World Cup winners' medals. It's important to note, countless legends have tried to equal this record. Maradona, Zidane, Ronaldo, Messi. None of them did it. Not one. Even the new generation of stars may never achieve it, because international soccer has become so competitive that winning 3 World Cups feels almost impossible now. Pelé did it decades ago, when the world was still discovering the magic of soccer on television, making his feat even more monumental. In America, we love dynasties. Think about the Chicago Bulls of the 1990s or the New England Patriots of the 2000s. Pelé wasn't just part of a dynasty, he was the dynasty. Without him, Brazil may never have become the soccer powerhouse that it is today. Number 9. Pelé scored over 200 career goals. Numbers don't lie, and Pelé's numbers are downright staggering. Depending on how you count, he scored anywhere from 1,281 to 1,283 goals in his career. That's right, more than 1,200 goals. To give you some perspective, Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, two of the most prolific scorers in modern history, only crossed the 800-850 mark after 2 decades of play. Pelé was scoring goals at a pace that seemed superhuman. Now, to be fair, some of his goals came in unofficial matches, exhibitions, and friendlies. Critics sometimes point out that not all of them were official, competitive goals, but let's pause and think about that. Even if you subtract the friendlies and only count official games, Pelé still scored 757 goals in 812 matches. That's nearly a goal per game. In today's era of defensive tactics and world-class goalkeepers, that ratio is almost unthinkable. Imagine an NBA player averaging 35 points per game across his entire career, or an MLB player hitting a home run in every other game. That's the level of dominance we're talking about here. Pelé didn't just score, he scored consistently, relentlessly, and often spectacularly. One of his most famous goals came in 1959, in a match against Juventus of São Paulo. Pelé dribbled past multiple defenders, faked out the goalkeeper, and calmly slotted the ball home. Fans still call it the goal of the century, even though the match wasn't recorded on film. People who were there swore it was the greatest goal they had ever seen, and their testimonies alone were enough for the Brazilian Football Confederation to create a plaque commemorating it. Think about that. A goal so legendary that they put up a plaque just for the memory of it. Pelé's scoring wasn't just about individual brilliance, though. He had an instinct for being in the right place at the right time, combined with lightning speed, powerful headers, and a lethal shot with both feet. He could score from distance, he could dribble through defenses, and he could rise above taller opponents to nod the ball into the net. He was the complete package. And here's something even more fascinating. Pelé scored 92 hat tricks in his career. That's 92 times he scored 3 or more goals in a single game. Think about how rare it is today when players like Messi or Ronaldo score a hat trick. It makes headlines around the world. For Pelé, it was almost routine. But beyond the statistics, Pelé's goals carried weight. They weren't just numbers on a sheet. They were moments of joy for millions of fans, especially in Brazil, where soccer was more than a game. It was an escape from poverty, politics, and hardship. Every time Pelé scored, he lifted the spirits of an entire nation. In a way, his goals were as much about hope as they were about winning. To understand this in American terms, imagine if every time Michael Jordan hit a game-winning shot, it didn't just bring joy to Chicago Bulls fans but to an entire country of 200 million people. That's what Pelé's goals meant to Brazil. They weren't just points on a scoreboard. They were proof that someone from the streets of a poor neighborhood could rise to global greatness and carry his country along with him. Pelé's story is filled with numbers that seem too good to be true, but they're all backed up by history. 3 World Cups, over 1,200 goals. These are not just statistics, they're milestones that define the legacy of a man who transcended his sport. But as incredible as the numbers are, what makes Pelé truly unforgettable is the way he connected with people, on the field, off the field, and across generations. 8. Pelé was a teenage prodigy who shocked the world at 17. It's hard to imagine now, but in the 1950s, soccer wasn't yet the global spectacle it would become. Television was still in its infancy, and the World Cup was only just beginning to capture international audiences. Into that world stepped a skinny, wide-eyed Brazilian teenager named Pelé. At just 17 years old, he walked onto the field at the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, and walked off as the biggest star on earth. Picture this, you're a high school junior, maybe juggling math homework and basketball practice after school. At that same age, Pelé was not only playing for Brazil's national team, but he was carrying them on his back to the most prestigious trophy in sports. The pressure would have crushed most kids, but Pelé wasn't most kids. During the semi-final against France, Pelé scored a hat trick, 3 goals that stunned the crowd and sent Brazil into the final. Then, in that final against the host nation Sweden, Pelé added 2 more, including one where he flicked the ball over a defender EU's head and smashed it into the net before anyone could react. That goal wasn't just a teenager's flash of brilliance. It was a global announcement. The world had a new king of soccer. In Brazil, radios crackled with the sound of commentators screaming his name, while back in Sweden, newspapers struggled to capture the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. A boy had become a legend overnight. The Brazilians crowned him O Rei, the king. And here's something almost unbelievable. Pelé was so young that he cried after the final whistle, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Teammates carried him around the pitch like a trophy, and his tears became part of the legend. The world had never seen anything like it. To give Americans a sense of how extraordinary this was, imagine if LeBron James had joined the NBA as a rookie straight out of high school and then led his team to win the NBA Finals in his very first year, all while being the Finals MVP at age 17. That's essentially what Pelé did, except on an international stage with hundreds of millions watching. But Pelé's brilliance wasn't a fluke. The 1958 World Cup was just the beginning. That performance launched him into the global spotlight, and he never looked back. Within months, European clubs were begging to sign him. Governments were praising him, and children across Brazil were running into the streets pretending to be Pelé every time they kicked a ball. He had become more than an athlete. He was a symbol of youthful possibility, a living reminder that age was just a number when paired with extraordinary talent and courage. What makes this fact so fascinating is not just that Pelé did it, but how he did it. He didn't play like a scared teenager. He played with the maturity and flair of a veteran, combining speed, technique, and creativity in a way the world had never seen before. His performance in Sweden remains one of the greatest teenage achievements in sports history, and it cemented Pelé as the face of a new era in soccer. Number 7. Pelé was declared a national treasure by Brazil. In the years following his breakout in 1958, Pelé became more than just a soccer player. He became a national treasure. Literally. In 1961, the Brazilian government passed a special law declaring Pelé an official national treasure. That meant he was legally prohibited from being transferred to a foreign club. No amount of money could pry him away from Santos, his Brazilian team. Think about that for a moment. Governments usually pass laws to protect monuments, forests, or works of art. Brazil passed one to protect a teenager with a soccer ball. That's how valuable Pelé was to the country. He wasn't just a player, he was a living symbol of Brazil's pride, culture, and identity on the world stage. At the time, European clubs like Real Madrid, Juventus, and AC Milan were offering astronomical sums of money to sign him. Imagine the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys trying to buy a player and being told, "Sorry, he's too important to the nation. He's basically a statue that moves." That was Pelé. Why did Brazil do this? For one, Pelé's presence elevated Brazil's image around the globe. In the early 1960s, the country was still developing, struggling with political instability and economic challenges. But every time Pelé played, Brazil looked like the center of the sporting universe. His goals were broadcast worldwide, and his name became synonymous with excellence. Protecting him was like protecting their reputation. But there was another layer. Pelé had become a hero for ordinary Brazilians. Kids from favelas, the poorest neighborhoods, saw him as proof that their dreams were impossible. He had been one of them, shining shoes and playing barefoot in the streets. Now he was the greatest player in the world. If he could do it, maybe they could too. Letting him leave for Europe would have felt like stealing hope from the people. This decision also had a profound impact on Pelé's career. While most global superstars in soccer today moved to Europe to chase glory in the Champions League, Pelé stayed in Brazil for the prime years of his career. With Santos, he won multiple Copa Libertadores titles and Intercontinental Cups, facing and defeating some of Europe's biggest clubs. In fact, Santos traveled the world like rock stars. playing exhibition matches everywhere from Africa to North America, with Pelé as the main attraction. One famous story comes from 1969, when Santos toured Nigeria during the country's civil war. It said that both sides agreed to a ceasefire for 48 hours just so they could watch Pelé play. Whether fully true or partly legend, the story illustrates the kind of influence he carried. A single man could pause a war, if only for a day, because people simply couldn't miss the chance to see him on the field. Being declared a national treasure also meant Pelé remained deeply connected to Brazilian fans in a way few modern stars can claim. He wasn't just their idol, he was their neighbor, their countryman, someone who belonged to them and to Brazil's story. His career became a shared national journey, and every goal he scored was celebrated not just as a sporting achievement, but as a patriotic victory. In American culture, we sometimes talk about athletes as being larger than life. Babe Ruth wasn't just a baseball player, he was America's hero during the Roaring '20s. Muhammad Ali wasn't just a boxer, he was a global voice for courage and pride. Pelé was that figure for Brazil, but with one key difference. His country literally made it law. He was too precious to let go, too important to be exported. Pelé was Brazil, and Brazil was Pelé. Number 6. Pelé's impact on America and the New York cosmos. By the mid-1970s, Pelé had already conquered the world. He had won 3 World Cups, scored over 1,000 goals, and achieved celebrity status that few athletes could ever dream of. But there was still one frontier where soccer wasn't king: the United States. Back then, Americans loved baseball, football, and basketball, but soccer, it was barely on the radar. That is, until Pelé arrived. In 1975, Pelé came out of semi-retirement and signed with the New York Cosmos of the North American Soccer League. The move was groundbreaking. Imagine if Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, at the peak of their fame, suddenly signed with a minor U.S. League team. That's how shocking it was. The Cosmos weren't just signing a player, they were importing the face of global soccer to ignite interest in a country that barely paid attention to the sport. And ignite it he did. Pelé's very first game in New York drew a massive television audience and packed the stands. Across America, people who had never watched a soccer game in their lives tuned in just to see him. The media frenzy was enormous. Celebrities like Mick Jagger, Muhammad Ali, and Robert Redford were suddenly sitting in the stands, watching soccer as if it were the hottest new ticket in town. The Cosmos became the coolest team in America, not because of their wins, but because of the man wearing number 10. Pelé's impact went far beyond entertainment. He changed perceptions. Suddenly, American kids were kicking soccer balls in backyards and parks, dreaming about being like him. Youth soccer leagues exploded in popularity. Parents who had never even said the word soccer before were signing their children up for teams. Pelé single-handedly planted the seeds for what would eventually grow into the massive soccer culture the U.S. enjoys today, including the rise of Major League Soccer decades later. And the Cosmos Tour. It was like a traveling circus of soccer glamour. They played matches around the world, with Pelé as the headliner. In 1977, Pelé played his final professional match in a Cosmos jersey at Giants Stadium. More than 75,000 fans filled the stadium, and millions more watched on television. That day was historic not only because Pelé retired, but because he did so in America, symbolizing his role as soccer's global ambassador. Here's something even more touching. During that farewell game, Pelé played one half for the Cosmos and the other half for Santos, his lifelong Brazilian club. It was the perfect ending to his career, bridging his roots in Brazil with his new role in America. After the match, Pelé grabbed the microphone and told the crowd, "Love, love, love." It wasn't just about soccer anymore. It was about unity, peace, and the way sports can bring people together. In the American sports landscape, Pelé was a trailblazer. He didn't make soccer instantly as big as football or baseball, but he cracked the door open. Without Pelé, there might not be MLS today, no sold-out stadiums for the U.S. women's team, no World Cup being hosted in the U.S. in 1994 or in 2026. His move to the New York Cosmos didn't just change his life. It changed the trajectory of soccer in America forever. Number 5. Pelé was a global ambassador beyond the field. When you think of athletes who transcended their sport, names like Muhammad Ali, Jackie Robinson, or Michael Jordan come to mind. Pelé belongs right at the top of that list, not just because of his talent, but because of how he used his fame beyond the soccer field. He wasn't just a player, he became a global ambassador for the sport and for humanity. Throughout his career, Pelé was constantly invited to meet world leaders. He shook hands with presidents, prime ministers, popes, and even royalty. In fact, one famous story involves the Queen of England. When Pelé visited in the 1960s, she reportedly said, "My people don't know much about soccer, but they know who Pelé is." That's how far his reputation stretched. Even in countries where soccer wasn't popular, Pelé's name carried weight. In 1992, he was appointed a United Nations ambassador for ecology and the environment, using his fame to promote global causes. Later, in 1995, he was named Brazil's Minister of Sports, where he pushed reforms to fight corruption in Brazilian soccer. He wasn't perfect. Politics are messy. But the very fact that Pelé transitioned from athlete to government official shows how deeply respected he was. His role as ambassador wasn't limited to official titles. Pelé's mere presence could calm tensions. As I mentioned earlier, when Santos played in Nigeria in 1969, both sides of a civil war supposedly agreed to a temporary ceasefire just to watch him play. Whether myth or reality, the story reflects something larger. Pelé was bigger than politics, bigger than conflict. He was someone everyone could rally around. In America, we often talk about sports as a unifier. Think about Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in baseball, or Jesse Owens winning gold medals in front of Hitler at the 1936 Olympics. Pelé played that role on a global scale. In countries divided by politics, class, or race, Pelé was a bridge. When he stepped on the field, none of that mattered. People of all backgrounds cheered together. But Pelé's ambassador role also came with challenges. He became a symbol of Brazil during a time when the country was under a military dictatorship. Critics argued that the government used Pelé's fame to distract from its authoritarian rule. Yet Pelé himself often steered clear of political controversy, preferring to focus on soccer and unity. Some faulted him for not speaking out more strongly, while others saw it as his way of keeping the focus on hope and inspiration. What can't be denied is the legacy he left as a global figure. Even after retirement, Pelé continued traveling the world, promoting soccer clinics, charity matches, and campaigns for education and children's rights. He appeared in commercials, movies, and documentaries, always using his platform to elevate the game and inspire new generations. And here's something personal. Countless players, from Diego Maradona to Lionel Messi, have said that meeting Pelé was like meeting a god. American stars like Kobe Bryant and Tom Brady also looked up to him as an example of how greatness could transcend the boundaries of sport. Pelé showed the world that an athlete could be more than just a competitor. He could be an ambassador, a symbol, and a force for global good. When you combine his ambassadorial role with his achievements on the field, you start to see why Pelé wasn't just a soccer player. He was an idea. The idea that sport has the power to change the world, to unite people, and to inspire hope in even the darkest of times. Pelé's time with the New York Cosmos and his role as a global ambassador prove that his legacy wasn't confined to goals and trophies. His influence reached across oceans, cultures, and generations. He wasn't just the king of football. He was a king of hearts worldwide. Before, Pelé was the first global sports icon of the television era. Before Pelé, sports stars were mostly local heroes. Babe Ruth was huge in America, but his fame didn't travel far beyond the United States. Cricket players in India or England were adored locally but virtually unknown elsewhere. What made Pelé different was timing. He rose to greatness just as television was becoming a global medium. And that timing transformed him into something brand new, the first truly global sports icon. When Brazil won the 1958 World Cup, millions around the world saw Pelé's brilliance on television for the very first time. By the 1960s, satellite broadcasting made it possible to beam live images across continents. That meant Pelé's goals weren't just heard on the radio or read about in the newspaper. They were seen in real time by people everywhere. Imagine sitting in a living room in New York or London in the late 1960s, flipping on the television, and watching Pelé juggle a ball, dribble past defenders, and score with a grace no one had seen before. Suddenly, soccer wasn't just Brazil's game, it was the world's game, and Pelé was its face. This was decades before the internet, YouTube, or social media. Yet Pelé became as famous in Asia and Africa as he was in South America and Europe. Kids in Nairobi, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, and Los Angeles all knew his name. They might not have understood Portuguese, but they understood Pelé. The 1970 World Cup in Mexico was a watershed moment. It was the first World Cup broadcast in color, and Pelé was front and center. His bright yellow Brazilian jersey, his smile, his electrifying style, all of it popped off the screen like never before. Millions of households around the globe watched Brazil's matches, and millions of kids were inspired to pick up a soccer ball afterward. Pelé himself later said that 1970 was when he truly realized how big his impact was, because wherever he traveled afterward, people greeted him like royalty. This fact highlights something bigger than sports: the power of media to shape culture. Pelé wasn't just scoring goals, he was shaping how the world saw athletes. Before him, players were often anonymous once they left their home countries. After him, being a global superstar became possible and expected. You can draw a straight line from Pelé to Michael Jordan's global fame in the 1990s, Tiger Woods in golf, Serena Williams in tennis, and today's soccer icons like Messi and Ronaldo. In the United States, television helped transform Pelé from a foreign name into a household one. Even people who didn't follow soccer knew who he was. He popped up on late-night talk shows, news broadcasts, and magazine covers. He wasn't just part of sports culture, he became part of pop culture. And here's a little detail that captures just how big he was. In 1970, Richard Nixon, then President of the United States, reportedly said he knew two words in Portuguese: Pelé and café. One was coffee, Brazil's most famous export. The other was Pelé, its most famous human being. That's the scale we're talking about. Number 3. Pelé's humanitarian legacy and lifelong dedication to children. While most people know Pelé as the king of soccer, many overlook another vital part of his life: his dedication to children, education, and humanitarian work. This wasn't something he took up after retiring. It was a passion he carried for decades, and it became just as much a part of his legacy as his trophies. Pelé grew up in poverty, the son of a poor soccer player whose career was cut short by injury. He knew what it meant to have nothing, to go to bed hungry, to play barefoot in the streets. That experience shaped him for life. When he became famous, Pelé never forgot where he came from. He wanted to give back, especially to kids who reminded him of his younger self. In the 1960s and 70s, Pelé began supporting youth programs in Brazil, helping to build soccer fields in poor neighborhoods and fund opportunities for underprivileged children. He believed soccer wasn't just a sport. It was a vehicle for education, discipline, and hope. To him, every ball kicked on a dirt field was a chance to keep a child away from crime or despair. Later in life, Pelé took this mission global. He worked with UNICEF and other international organizations to promote children's rights and education worldwide. In 1994, the United Nations appointed him a Goodwill Ambassador, allowing him to travel the globe advocating for peace and opportunities for kids. He visited schools, refugee camps, and hospitals, always emphasizing the same message, that every child deserved a chance, just like he once had. One of his most moving quotes came when he said, "Success is no accident. It is hard work, perseverance, learning, studying, sacrifice, and most of all, love of what you are doing or learning to do." He wasn't just talking about soccer. He was talking about life, about the power of effort and passion to overcome poverty and hardship. Pelé also used his fame to raise money for causes beyond sports. He played in countless charity matches, often traveling thousands of miles to appear at fundraisers. In 2012, for example, he helped launch a campaign to fight illiteracy in Africa. Even late in his life, when his health was failing, Pelé continued to speak about education and children's welfare. In America, athletes like LeBron James, who built schools for kids in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, are celebrated for giving back. Pelé was doing the same decades earlier, proving that the role of a sports star could go far beyond scoring points or signing autographs. He showed that athletes had the power and responsibility to uplift communities. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this legacy is how personal it was. Pelé often said that his proudest moments weren't always on the field, but when he saw children smiling because of something he did off it. Whether it was kicking a ball with kids in a slum in Rio or shaking hands with a child in a refugee camp in Africa, Pelé knew his influence went deeper than goals. He was more than the king of soccer. He was also a king of compassion. Pelé's role as the first global television sports icon and his lifelong dedication to children reveal a side of him that numbers and trophies can capture. He wasn't just famous. He was beloved. He wasn't just a champion. He was a humanitarian. These facts remind us that Pelé's greatness was measured not only in goals, but in the lives he touched around the world. Go-to. Pelé changed the business of sports. Forever before Pelé, athletes were mostly just players. They earned modest salaries, played their games, and faded into retirement. Endorsements were rare, international tours even rarer, and athletes weren't considered brands. Pelé flipped that model on its head and, in the process, laid the foundation for the billion-dollar sports industry we see today. In the 1960s and 70s, Pelé became one of the first athletes to truly cash in on his fame. He signed endorsement deals with companies like Puma, Pepsi, and Volkswagen. One legendary story tells how Puma secured Pelé's endorsement during the 1970 World Cup by paying him to tie his shoelaces in full view of the cameras before kickoff. It was such a simple act, but millions of viewers noticed. Sales skyrocketed, and sports marketing was changed forever. This was revolutionary. Today, we take it for granted that stars like LeBron James, Tom Brady, or Lionel Messi make more money from endorsements than from their salaries. But in Pelé's day, that concept barely existed. He helped invent it. Pelé showed that an athlete wasn't just valuable on the field. He was valuable off it, as a symbol and as a brand. Pelé also pioneered international tours. With Santos, he traveled the globe, playing exhibition matches from Europe to Africa to Asia. These weren't just games, they were showcases of Brazilian soccer, and Pelé was the headliner. Think of it as the Beatles going on a world tour, but with soccer instead of music. Everywhere Pelé went, stadiums sold out, governments rolled out red carpets, and fans screamed his name. That global exposure created a blueprint for how modern sports leagues expand internationally. When the NBA sends teams to play preseason games in China, or when the NFL plays games in London, they're following a path Pelé helped carve out. He made sports a global spectacle, not just a local pastime. The business side of Pelé's career also carried into retirement. He wrote books, appeared in movies, and remained a marketable figure for decades. Even in his later years, corporations lined up to partner with him because his name still carried magic. Pelé had become more than a soccer player. He was a business empire. In America, we often talk about Michael Jordan as the athlete who changed sports business with his Nike deal and the Air Jordan brand. But Pelé was doing that 20 years earlier. He may not have had his own sneaker line, but he demonstrated that athletes could be global marketing powerhouses. Without Pelé, the concept of the sports superstar brand might not exist as we know it today. Number 1. Pelé's legacy, the man who became immortal. When Pelé passed away in December 2022, the world stopped to mourn. Stadiums dimmed their lights, fans in every country wore his number 10 jersey, and monuments from Rio de Janeiro to Paris lit up in his honor. It wasn't just the death of an athlete, it was the passing of a legend, a man who had become larger than life. Pelé's legacy can't be captured by statistics alone, though the numbers are jaw-dropping. Over 1,200 goals, 3 World Cups, countless trophies. What makes his story immortal is the way he inspired people. To Brazilians, he was proof that a boy from poverty could rise to global greatness. To fans around the world, he was the joy of soccer personified. Smiling, graceful, unstoppable. What set Pelé apart wasn't just his skill, but his spirit. He played with a kind of freedom and creativity that felt almost childlike. Every dribble, every feint, every goal carried the sense of someone who loved the game deeply. That joy was contagious. Fans didn't just admire Pelé, they loved him, and that love spanned generations. Grandparents told their grandchildren stories of watching Pelé in the 1950s, and kids born decades later still knew his name. Even his rivals respected him. Diego Maradona, often compared as his greatest challenger for the GOAT title, once said, "Pelé will be eternal." He was unique. He made the game beautiful. Lionel Messi called him eternal. Cristiano Ronaldo called him an inspiration for millions. When legends honor you as a legend, you know your place in history is secure. Pelé also left behind a legacy of humility. Despite being arguably the most famous athlete of the 20th century, he often carried himself with warmth and kindness. He smiled constantly, greeted strangers like old friends, and never seemed to forget his roots. He once said, "I was born to play football, just as Beethoven was born to write music and Michelangelo was born to paint." But even in that statement there was no arrogance. Just a recognition of his gift and a desire to share it with the world. Pelé's immortality is also cultural. His name has become shorthand for greatness. People say, the Pelé of basketball, or the Pelé of tennis, when describing someone at the very top of their field. Few names achieve that level of universality. It's like Einstein in science or Shakespeare in literature. Pelé belongs in that rare category. And, finally, Pelé's greatest legacy might be the game itself. Before him, soccer was popular, but after him, it was universal. He carried the sport from dusty fields in Brazil to televisions in New York, Tokyo, and Lagos. He made soccer the global game it is today. That is immortality, not just being remembered, but leaving the world fundamentally different than you found it. Pelé's life is a story of impossible triumphs, from barefoot kid to global icon, from poverty to immortality. His 10 greatest facts tell us about his trophies, his records, his influence, and his heart. But more than that, they tell us about what one human being can achieve when passion meets talent, when discipline meets joy. Pelé wasn't just the king of soccer. He was, and will always be, the king of inspiration. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like and share to spread Pelé's story even further. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss more fascinating stories of legends who changed the world. And drop a comment below. What's your favorite Pelé moment, and do you think anyone will ever truly replace him? Join the conversation. because the king's story belongs to all of us.